Did Keir Starmer just make the biggest political mistake of his career, and is King Charles now privately furious behind palace walls because of it? Across Britain, fury is exploding like never before. The quiet anger of British farmers has now turned into open rebellion, and shockingly, Starmer's government has done the unthinkable, ordering the police to start arresting peaceful protesters who dared to rise up against Labour's brutal 20% inheritance tax on family farms. But here's the twist that has rocked the entire nation. Nigel Farage has stormed into the fight, personally stepping in to block Labour's terrifying plan to crush these protests. And according to royal insiders, King Charles himself has been left deeply unsettled by Starmer's reckless power grab, fearing that the nation could spiral into civil unrest. What on earth is happening behind the scenes in Downing Street and Buckingham Palace? And has Starmer's obsession with control finally pushed Britain to the brink? For months, quiet resentment had been building in the countryside. Farmers across England, Wales and Scotland were grumbling over rising costs, punishing restrictions and endless interference from distant bureaucrats in London. But then Keir Starmer dropped the hammer, a 20% inheritance tax on family farms worth over £1 million. The result? Instant outrage. This was no ordinary tax tweak. This was a direct attack on the very families who feed the nation, those who had spent generations working the land, raising cattle, planting crops, and building something real and lasting. And now Labour wanted to seize it all, dressed up as a green policy to fund their net zero obsession. In small towns and villages, word spread fast. Tractors gathered, farmers met in pubs and market squares. Talk turned from frustration to action. And then it happened. Dozens, then hundreds, of farmers drove their machinery straight into cities and towns, blocking roads, disrupting traffic, and dumping loads of hay and manure outside government offices. Outside Parliament itself, mountains of wheat and barley symbolised their rage, sending a clear message: we feed this nation, and you will not steal our land. But instead of listening, or even pretending to care, Keir Starmer did the unthinkable. Rather than meet with farmer groups or offer compromise, his government unleashed the police. Protest leaders were rounded up for questioning. Threats of mass arrests filled the air. Police vans rolled into quiet rural towns. Dossiers were prepared listing high-risk protest organisers. The government began branding these proud farmers, ordinary, working men and women, as domestic extremists and eco-saboteurs. Britain watched in shock as Labour criminalised its own countryside. And yet, even this wasn't the final straw, because something happened that Starmer never saw coming. Nigel Farage entered the battlefield. The Reform Party leader, known for his ability to smell political disaster a mile away, saw an opening and took it. In an explosive statement, Farage condemned Labour's plot to arrest farmers as economic cleansing disguised as green justice, a brutal phrase that stuck in headlines and on the lips of voters. Within hours, Farage's voice boomed across radio, television and social media. This is not protest, this is survival. These farmers are not criminals, they are patriots standing against tyranny. The country listened. Reform MPs stormed Parliament, demanding Starmer explain why working-class farmers were being treated like terrorists, while elite tax dodgers in the City of London remained untouched. Petitions exploded online. Support poured in from every corner of Britain. Starmer's nightmare was beginning. But Farage wasn't done. Using confidential parliamentary procedures, the Reform Party leader exposed a secret plan inside the Home Office, an operation codenamed Green Clampdown designed to arrest protest leaders, seize farm equipment used in blockades, and fine landowners for disruption of public order. The revelation sent shockwaves through Westminster. For Starmer, the mask was ripped away. No more climate justice slogans or tax fairness lies. This was raw, naked state power designed to crush dissent. And then came the shock no one expected. A senior judge, one of the UK's top legal authorities, broke ranks. Insiders leaked that this high-level figure had warned the government in private. Arresting farmers could spark a constitutional crisis. It risked breaking the legal protections on free assembly and peaceful protest, rights deeply enshrined in British law since the Magna Carta. Even the judiciary, the system supposed to stay neutral, was alarmed at Starmer's growing authoritarianism. But that was only the beginning of the storm. Because far from calming the waters, Farage's bold stand and the judge's secret warning sparked chaos inside the palace walls. Yes, Buckingham Palace itself was drawn into the drama. Sources close to King Charles whispered to reporters that His Majesty was privately disturbed by Starmer's behaviour. The king, a quiet supporter of environmental causes, had never imagined Labour would use the green agenda as a weapon against ordinary Britons. Palace aides warned Starmer's crackdown risked destabilising the nation and creating an unpredictable rural uprising. One courtier put it simply, "This is not what the king signed up for. He is watching closely, and he is not amused." And as the farmers' revolt raged in the streets, as Farage exposed the dirty secrets of Starmer's government, and as the judges and royals squirmed in private, the British public finally awoke to the terrifying reality. The country was slipping into something dark. As the farmer protests grew louder and the countryside swelled with rebellion, something even darker began to surface inside the halls of power. Secret meetings were held behind locked doors at the Home Office and number 10 Downing Street. Meetings that senior insiders now claim were far more sinister than anyone imagined. Starmer's advisors, panicking at the scale of the revolt, began drafting what can only be described as an authoritarian emergency plan. A plan designed not to calm tensions, but to crush them completely. Codenamed Operation Farm Block, this chilling blueprint called for the mass surveillance of farmer groups, the freezing of farm subsidies for protest participants, and the possible seizure of agricultural equipment suspected of being used in demonstrations. Even the army was quietly placed on standby, ready to assist police units if the unrest spiralled out of control. But here's the most shocking part. This scheme was being kept secret from Parliament, the press, and even the palace. Yet Starmer's bubble of secrecy was about to burst. The leak started as whispers in Westminster, a frightened backbencher warning that Starmer's inner circle was plotting to neutralise the farmers before reform. And Nigel Farage could turn the countryside revolt into a nationwide anti-Labour movement. Then came the bombshell leak from a senior civil servant who handed a classified dossier to a Reform MP, proof that police forces were being instructed to draw up lists of subversive farm operators and to prepare preemptive arrests on charges of public disorder. This document, revealed live on national television by a furious Farage, sent shockwaves across the UK. The footage showed Starmer's Labour Party for what it truly was, a government willing to treat its own citizens as enemies, criminalising the very people who put food on the nation's tables. And the backlash was instant. Farmers in Devon, Yorkshire and the Midlands vowed to blockade every major road in protest. Social media erupted with videos of tractors rolling toward Westminster. Even haulage companies, sympathetic to the farmers, threatened to stop delivering goods to London. The pressure cooker was ready to blow, but as public fury exploded, another voice quietly entered the crisis, one far more powerful than anyone expected. King Charles himself. For days, the monarch had watched the chaos unfold from Buckingham Palace, receiving daily briefings from his advisors. At first, he had remained silent, mindful of his constitutional role. But the leaks from Downing Street and the secret crackdown plan changed everything. Behind palace doors, King Charles finally broke his silence. In an extraordinary message relayed through trusted courtiers, the king delivered a private but unmistakable warning to Starmer. Cease the arrests, respect the farmers' rights, or risk a full-scale constitutional crisis. Palace insiders, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed that His Majesty was deeply troubled by Labour's behaviour. The king, whose public image has long been tied to rural Britain and environmental stewardship, was reportedly horrified that his cherished green cause was now being used as a weapon against the very farmers he had spent decades championing. One courtier chillingly remarked, "The king feels betrayed. His Majesty never imagined that the green agenda would be twisted into a tool of state repression. He is watching very, very closely." For Starmer, this was a nightmare. The palace's intervention, even unofficial, risked igniting a political firestorm unlike any seen in recent British history. In constitutional terms, a monarch directly challenging the government's internal security policies is almost unthinkable. Yet here was Charles sending a clear message that Labour had crossed a line. And the public knew it. Rumours of the king's warning spread like wildfire. #Stand with Farmers began trending across social media. Public opinion polls revealed a dramatic shift. Labour's lead in rural and semi-rural seats collapsed overnight. Reform support surged. Even lifelong Labour voters expressed disgust at the party's betrayal of working-class farmers. Inside Downing Street, panic set in. Starmer's advisors urged him to retreat, to quietly scrap the inheritance tax proposal, to defuse the revolt. But the Prime Minister, stubborn, prideful and surrounded by hardline eco-ideologues, refused. He doubled down. At a tense cabinet meeting, sources say, Starmer dismissed concerns about the farmers as rural noise and insisted the green tax would remain. He raged at Farage's success in capturing public sympathy, accusing the reform leader of spreading sedition. But it was clear to everyone else in the room, Starmer was losing control. And then came the final blow. The senior judge, who had already privately warned the government of its legal peril, broke cover, this time leaking a scathing legal memorandum to the press. In it, the judge accused Labour of risking a breach of the European Convention on Human Rights and the UK's own Bill of Rights. The memo warned that arresting peaceful farmers would be seen by the courts as a gross abuse of executive authority, opening the door to endless legal challenges and possible defeat in the Supreme Court. Overnight, legal experts, commentators, and even former government ministers lined up to denounce Starmer's authoritarian drift. For the first time since taking office, Starmer faced rebellion on every front. The farmers were blockading roads. Nigel Farage was commanding the airwaves. The king was issuing veiled warnings from the palace. And now the judiciary itself was preparing to strike. But the question remained, would Starmer bend or would he break? The nation held its breath, because the next 48 hours would decide everything. As darkness fell over Westminster, the mood inside Buckingham Palace grew tenser by the hour. What began as private dismay from King Charles had turned into an urgent constitutional crisis. Trusted royal aides quietly made contact with top government officials, demanding immediate answers. In a rarely seen move, senior palace advisors arranged an emergency late-night call with the Prime Minister's office. Bypassing normal channels, the message was clear and chilling. His Majesty was no longer willing to stand by as Labour's crackdowns pushed the nation toward chaos. If Starmer persisted in targeting peaceful farmers with arrests and asset seizures, the king would be forced to consider formal constitutional options, words that sent shockwaves down the spines of civil servants and ministers alike. The Prime Minister's private office flooded with frantic messages from party whips, fearful Labour MPs, and intelligence chiefs warning that the countryside revolt was spreading. Tractors, once symbols of quiet rural life, had become mobile barricades blocking main roads from Yorkshire to Cornwall. Supermarket shelves in some towns began to run low as supply lines faltered. The farmers were not bluffing. They were choking the nation's food chain to prove their point. And the public, overwhelmingly, on their side. Poll after poll showed a tidal wave of sympathy for the men and women of the soil, with ordinary Britons posting messages of support, food donations, and offers to join the blockades. Senior insiders revealed that the Prime Minister, once hailed as a steady hand, was now gripped by fury and paranoia. In a furious late-night meeting with his closest cabinet allies, Starmer allegedly slammed the table and accused the king of meddling in state policy. His face red with rage, Starmer ranted that Charles was overstepping his bounds, a stunning accusation that stunned even his loyal Home Secretary. Worse still, intelligence briefings warned that military commanders were quietly refusing to mobilise against the protesters without palace approval, a silent but unmistakable sign that the king's shadow loomed large over every decision. Britain's constitutional balance was cracking, and everyone knew it. In the quiet corridors of Whitehall, news broke that top military officials had held secret talks with palace representatives. According to credible leaks, senior generals expressed grave concern about being ordered to suppress lawful farmers protesting an unjust tax policy. The army, Britain's last line of authority, was slipping out of government control. One source whispered to the press, "The military is loyal to the crown, not the cabinet. If this escalates, they won't follow Downing Street. They'll follow the king." The words hit like an earthquake. In modern British history, no Prime Minister had ever faced the open defiance of the armed forces and the monarchy at the same time. As this revelation exploded across the media, Starmer's Labour government visibly cracked. Moderate Labour MPs, terrified of being dragged into political suicide, broke ranks in live interviews, condemning the Prime Minister's arrogance and calling for the farm tax to be scrapped immediately. One brave MP from a rural Welsh constituency went further, openly demanding Starmer resign to restore public trust. Within hours, 15 more MPs joined the mutiny, and the Labour Whip's office collapsed into chaos. Threats of resignations poured in. Cabinet ministers locked themselves in offices, drafting personal statements in case the government fell before dawn. At the same time, King Charles escalated behind the scenes. Royal couriers dispatched formal letters to Starmer's office, letters bearing the seal of Buckingham Palace, and written with the unmistakable weight of the crown. The contents: a stern demand that Labour immediately suspend all police operations against farmers, halt any inheritance tax enforcement, and enter into urgent negotiations with rural representatives. But the unspoken threat was even graver. If ignored, the king might break 400 years of royal silence and address the nation directly, an act that would shatter every political convention and leave Starmer fatally exposed. Inside Labour HQ, dread hung thick in the air. Party strategists knew what such a royal address would mean: instant collapse of public confidence, mass defections by MPs, and the likely downfall of the government itself. Worse yet, Nigel Farage circled like a shark in the water. Reform Party rallies were swelling in every city. New polls showed Farage overtaking Labour in key marginal constituencies. The farmers had become heroes, the government the enemy. Even lifelong Labour voters in working-class northern towns turned their backs on Starmer's regime. And then, the final leak. A confidential palace transcript, somehow smuggled to the media, revealed that King Charles had told his inner circle, "This government no longer commands the people's respect. They govern without consent. This cannot stand." The words hit Britain like thunder. News channels ran the quote non-stop. Tabloid headlines screamed, "The King's verdict? Starmer must go." Social media platforms lit up with calls for a general election. Labour's polling numbers collapsed overnight. In desperation, Starmer made one last gamble. At 3 a.m, Downing Street issued a statement. The police operations were suspended, pending review, and talks with farmer leaders would begin within 24 hours. But the damage was done. The government had lost the countryside, the courts, the military, and now the crown itself. In living rooms across Britain, millions of citizens watched the unfolding disaster and knew the truth. Keir Starmer's grip on power was broken. What remained was only the formality of his political funeral. The Prime Minister stood alone, trapped between an angry king, a furious people, and a defiant army. And for the first time in modern British history, a monarch's quiet hand had undone the rule of an elected government. But the endgame was not yet over. The nation braced for what would come next, because in the shadow of Buckingham Palace, a final royal ultimatum was being prepared. And so, Britain stands on the edge of an unprecedented political reckoning. A prime minister abandoned by his own party, rejected by the people, defied by the military, and now silently but firmly opposed by the king himself. Keir Starmer's dream of reshaping Britain into his vision has crumbled into dust, buried beneath the revolt of the farmers, the roar of reform, and the quiet power of the crown. But the final question remains: will Starmer step down before he's forced out? Or will King Charles take the historic step of speaking directly to the nation, triggering a constitutional earthquake not seen in centuries? What do you think? Is this the end of Keir Starmer's reign, or just the beginning of an even bigger crisis? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The battle for Britain's future has only just begun.